There's quite an intro. Probably a lot of y'all have heard that song done by Led Zeppelin, the original. This was a cover done by a metal band and slowed it down a notch. They had it going a little bit fast tempo and to make sure we heard the words and everything. And before we get started here, I'm just wondering what people you think that Robert Plant and Led Zeppelin were singing about. Come from the land of the ice and snow. It sounds real familiar. What they're doing there is they have a blend between the tales of Tolkien and ancient Celtic stories and the stories of Proto-Indo-Europeans coming into the land and the stories of we put this to Vikings a lot, and it's called the immigrant song for a reason. But it tales of Thor and all these things, and our only goal is to reach the western shore. And that leads me a bunch of different directions. For are we talking about the tales of Akhenaten's daughter Scotia reaching the lands on the western shore? Are we talking about the ancient people that lived there that said that some of these ancient people came out of the sea from the western shore? Are we talking about these people who were driving themselves across new lands and coming across, and their only goal was to reach the western shore? And I realized long ago, whenever I was a kid, and because they said Jimmy Page and he worships the devil and all this stuff, and I saw a British TV guy talking to him way back when, and he said something about, hey, they say that you learned how to play guitar incredibly by meeting the devil, like those people on the crossroads and everything. Do you just take that as a compliment? And it was like a leading question off in it, and he just laughs and says something and walks off like, yeah, mate, all right, whatever. And but the symbolism that they show on their albums and things leads you to know that they know a little bit too much, right? And then you can see things like whenever he got into this 50 craze that he was doing, he sang that song about New Caledonia. And we're going to talk about Caledonia a little bit and things, and we're going to start off with the Picts here, for it's one of the harbor people, and people don't even understand who they are now and who they used to be. And there are tales told about them and different things, and I'm going to relate to you a bunch of little stories, and this is probably going to go on a multi-parter, and I'll tell you ahead of time, but we're just going to get into this a little bit. I did one here last year, and as I was brushing up across things, as I was making connections, and I wanted to make a sweep through for everybody so I could keep your attention kind of, and then I went back through and then I said, check this crap out, and started showing you older stuff and Proto-Indo-Europeans and all this other things, and connections, and that's really what last year was about, and really what all of these are about, is making connections and finishing off that web for people who are 3/4 complete. Like I myself feel like, there's always something I keep learning all of the time, and a connection is made, and therefore I don't feel like the web ever ends, and truly the spider never really ends. He's just got to keep going on that situation. But if you keep going long enough, just like Charlotte's Web, you can clearly see what it says. Well, that song's always got me. I mean, it's a power song from back in the day. It is one of the reasons they call it heavy metal. And you can imagine too, whenever I was a kid and hearing about the Bronze Ages and all this stuff, Conan the Barbarian, which we'll talk about here shortly, and some other stuff, and how this really all related. And then I read Tolkien and stuff, and they came out with a cartoon movie about the Hobbit, but they never did the trilogy part of it and the rest of it, and they showed one part of one great army thing that they never really pulled off in that way in the other shows. But we'll get into it in a little bit, but see if we don't recognize the people of the Shire, perhaps, and mentioning while we go through this that people maybe have a slightly smaller stature in comparison to other people, which apparently are showing up, and things that lead you to think, well, who was these hobbits, and who was Frodo, and who was this, and then, well, who was Gandalf, and who are these priests and these pointy-haired people, druidic type of guys that had a pointy hat that we've talked about before, and showed you these strange witches' hats that they had made out of gold that show all these circles around on them, and they figured out it's a whole solar lunar calendar and the whole 9 yards. And there's still some of them in Germany today. That's where you see them in the exhibits. And there's one other one up north, more in this area. Nobody knows where the others are. I bet somebody does. This thing keeps trying to pull a darkness to me. Let's see if I can get this back at the light. Okay. Picts. The Picts were a confederation of Celtic-speaking people who lived in what is today eastern and northern Scotland during the late British Iron Age and early medieval periods, where they lived, and what their culture was like can be inferred from early medieval texts and Pictish stones. If we take a look at that, that's going to have iconography that looks, very Christian. It's a cross and things. I'm telling you, that was there before you think that it was. Their name in Latin, Picti, appears in written records from late antiquity, from the 10th century. They lived to the north of the rivers Forth and Clyde. Early medieval sources report the existence of distinct Pictish language, which today is believed to have been an insular Celtic language closely related to the Brythonic spoken by the Britons who lived to the south. And so, let me just cut through it a little bit and tell you that this story about fairies and brownies and things relate to these people that were there whenever they came in. Now, who are they? Well, that's Proto-Indo-Europeans, actually. They came in different waves. You see, because this area was up under ice at the end of the last ice age. And so there were people south of that, and then they migrated back north. And who are all these different people? And, well, they formed out different stuff a little bit. Well, they weren't the Germans. Well, the Germans are coming later. Yeah, and they're supposed to have this heritage and things. Yes, they do. Well, how does that work out? There are stories that tell you that back before time, these people were here before. And you think, well, okay, the only way that makes sense is if you're talking about the last ice age, and that's a hell of a long time. And I go, yeah, I'm sorry. It just points towards that's what they're talking about. I can't get any verifications for back there. We can't get any writing and things like that and stuff. And there's not necessarily artifacts, but there are cave paintings and things like that. And we can find some of it in that. Let me plug this thing in here before it goes low battery on me. There we go. So let's just go ahead and get off into this. There's a lot of things I could say, and I'll eventually try to say them all, for I thought of a million before I started this. Picts are assumed to have been descendants of the Caledoni, so Caledonia. You wonder about New Caledonia and how that hooks up to Australia and the islands and stuff, and what does that have to do with anything? Well, it has a lot to do with things. These people used to get around a whole lot. Yeah. And that song had boats in it, and everybody went, oh, well, that's got to be the Vikings. And they're like, oh, as we learned here, there are a lot of people that had boats. And some of these people came there by going through a boat through the Black Sea, through the Mediterranean, all the way around. out the Pillars of Hercules and the ancient stories. And we'll have a little bit of Atlantis and all kinds of stuff here coming up. Stick with me. Let me see if I can get going. Coffee hadn't kicked in. So they were descendants of Caledonia and other Iron Age tribes that were mentioned by Roman historians on the world map of Ptolemy. And if we look at the Ptolemaic map, they're not going to show it there. And I've shown this before. See if it pops up good enough to see now. I've shown this before, but what's odd about this map is that it has declamations written onto it, and they already know the world's 360 degrees and everything, and they've got only a portion of the degrees marked out on it and laying it out as if you could wrap it around a globe. And so this shows you that they the what? Yeah, but they're mentioned up there in that top left-hand corner. Pictland, also called Pictavia by some sources, achieved a large degree of political unity in the late 7th and 8th centuries through expanding kingdom of Fortui. So we're going to be talking about what people know about in all this late time that goes after 6th century and so on, later in date. But a lot of the stories and the things relate to a way long time ago. Not like over last ice age and everything, but a time thousands of years before that. For where the hell were these people? Way before. By 900, the resulting Pictish over kingdom had merged with the Gaelic kingdom, so the Gauls, remember that, and Dalriada to form the kingdom of Alba in Scotland. By the 13th century, Alba expanded to include formerly Britannic kingdom of Strathside. So when we look at things like that, it's going to show this map. It's going to keep popping on and off. How's that work? Anyhow, it's got areas that keep showing in that. Northumbrian, Lothian, Bernicia, and Dara became Bernicia Dara. All these guys and tribes and things got away, what they call Galloway. Some of these are famous people's names that are still existent today. And then there's Western Isles, which is all of the islands on the outskirt here, right? Pictish society was typical of many Iron Age societies in Northern Europe, having a wide connections and parallels with neighboring groups. So there's not anybody that really sticks out like a sore thumb, but we're left to believe that they were. But quite a few things came through that left us with a mythology of these, ancient fairies and brownies and Picts and little butterfly people and all kinds of stuff. And so let's see if we'll pick that apart just a little bit and see if it doesn't come to us. While very little in the way of Pictish writing has survived, Pictish history since the late 6th century is known from a variety of sources, including Bede's, a historical Ecclesiastica Genus Aclorum. And so Bede, the stories, and then we have the ancient tale of Beowulf and Grendel and all these things that come out of this stuff. But as far as that of Columbian, Andaman, and various Irish annals. Now, of course, Beowulf is another slaying of a beast that's very much like slaying the giant snake. That's kind of very much like the idea of Thor and Jormungandr, and very much like the idea of Yam, the sea god, and the serpent. And it's all, but that same concept just all over the place. And even some people that aren't anywhere near the ocean seem to have this idea of this sea serpent creature and Leviathan situation, right? We've talked about Levi, and Levi is the name of a pointy hat of the Canaanites. Strange that. Well, the Levitical priests were supposed to, Let's continue. So now we're going to look at etymology of the name and so on, but I could cut through it, but so from Latin pingere or pictus, to paint or painted, and it's where we get the idea of picture. And I know we take pictures nowadays that are a digital representation, exactly, but before pictures were drawn, and pictography is what the very first and eldest languages were little symbols that meant things. And in fact, phonetics comes out of taking the first letters of each one of those, like A is for apple, B is for ball. And so if you wanted to show ABBA, you would show apple, ball, ball, apple. Right? Phonetics, Phoenicians. But it appears written by Eunymus in 297 AD, so they've already got this going on, and these painted or tattooed people, right? From Greek, Pictus, with a Y, like pyramid, meaning picture. Pict is Peter in Norse, and Peter has to do with pater and father situations. Mosnap. Let's continue. Piata in Old English, Pecht in Scots, and Pethwer, which are picked men, in Welsh. And Welsh have a connection to this, definitely. Some things words suggest are original Pictish roots instead of a Latin coinage. In writings from Ireland, the name Cuthin, Cruthini, Cruthini, Cruthine, or modern Irish Cruthna, is used both to refer to the Picts and other group of people who lived alongside the Uliad, strange name there, in eastern Ulster. It is generally accepted and is derived from Quirtane, which is the Coitalic Q Celtic version of the Brittonic P Celtic Prytani. From this game, Brittani, as in Britain, and Roman came for those now called the Britons. There to go. What the Picts called themselves is unknown. It has been proposed that they call themselves Albidoisi, a name found in the Chronicle of the Kings of Alba. And Alba has to do with albinism and everything, and white people, and White Cliffs of Dover, and all this type of thing. During the reign of Mai Kalum Macdomnale, but this idea has been disputed. An undefined Pictish identity may be consolidated with the Virtuan hegemony established following the Battle of Dundalkane in 685 AD. And so, when you look at something like this, it's kind of like, well, they're telling you where they were now, but people can change their names over time, and then the problem is those damn Greeks, and Romans later, went around naming everybody, and whatever they called somebody, we ended up calling them by that, and we're so stuck on that in dichotomy given by the people that are the victors or whatever, but quite often not. Hadrian Wall, knock knock, to where maybe we're using the wrong word altogether. And if they had a different word, like say they were called the Irish, so that's air, so why don't we call these people Aryans? Well, they're not the, are they, or aren't they? If you take it back one step, are they? If you take it back two, aren't all of the people that we've been talking about basically the same? These blue-eyed people? I know they can find somebody at 6800 AD that everybody apparently from then on is related to that has blue-eyed traits or whatever. That doesn't mean he didn't have a granddad, or it doesn't go back way farther than that. How far does it go back? Well, we've talked about Cro-Magnons here lately and things, and it seems to go back at least between them and Neanderthals some 40,000 years. And that's where we got so far. What if they found a Cro-Magnon type skull that was 65,000 years? Does that change things a little bit? Because we're currently talking about a lot of places where if we can change something a couple of 100 years, it's a game changer, right? And a couple of 1,000 years is like, wow, and Göbekli Tepe is so old that the people built the pyramids were closer to right now than the people who built the pyramids were closer to the people that built Göbekli Tepe. Well, that's just over 5,000 years, and things can go much further than that. And we talk about Cro-Magnon at 28,000 having genetics, DNA that's in Europe today. Quite enlightening when you start finding out things, but then if you don't compile them and put them together, you don't really maybe get the whole picture. Da-doonch. Let's talk about some history. A Pictish confederation was formed in late antiquity from a number of tribes, and how and why is not known. Some scholars have speculated that it was partly in response to the growth of the Roman Empire. That comes later, bud. The Pictish Chronicle, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, and the early historiographers such as Bede, Joffre, Mammoth, Hollandized, etc., Holinshed, etc., all present the Picts as conquerors of Alba from Scythia. However, no credence is now given to that view. I wonder why. Well, it's because they figured out whenever they came through and the Anglo-Saxons and everything, and that's going to come to indirect opposition. And okay, they came before that. We've got a few thousand years to play with here. A few. If you're going to be all 687 AD, we've got a few thousand years to play with here. Let's continue. Pictland had previously been described by Roman writers and geographers as the home of the Caledoni, and these Romans also used the other names to refer to tribes living in that area, including Virtuones, virtuous people, Taxiale, Venetianes, which is Venetians. How would that be working out? Oh, well, did they have little boats and live down canals and things, and do have that network going real bad, and they're like, it's like Venice or something? I mean, what is this? But they may have heard these other names only second or third hand, or from speakers of Brittonic or Gallic language who may have used different names for the same group or different groups. Pictish recorded history begins in the early Middle Ages. Well, doesn't that suck? At that time, the Gauls of Dal Riata controlled what is now Argyll, a part of the kingdom straddling the sea between Britain and Ireland. The Angles of Bernicia, which merged with the Deira of Northumbria, overwhelmed the adjacent Britain kingdoms, and for much of the 7th century, Northumbria was the most powerful kingdom in Britain. The Picts were probably tributary to Northumbria until the reign of Bride MacBelly in 685 AD. The Anglians suffered a defeat in the Battle of Dun Nectane that halted their northward expansion. The Northumbrians continued to dominate southern Scotland for the remainder of the Pictish period. But Picts go back way older than that. Here's something that they found, by the way, and I'll go back. And what this is, and I know it looks like a huge dog chain or something like this, but this was a chain that they kept around their neck, which might have been put on the dog and used as a leash, it's possible, whatever. But you want to talk about thick gold chains and shit. This is a thick, solid silver, 100% chain, and the links are used in ancient times as money. And to a lot of people who used to deal with these people long, long ago, a la the Phoenicians and things that we hear about going up and getting tin and silver and so on, thought it was worth more than gold. There'll be another picture, I think, of another one like this. So that's on a neck collar type of things, and people would say, man, that looks like some kind of slavery collar or something, and they're like, yeah, pictures could be taken from that, but Let's just continue. Pictish attempts to achieve a similar dominance over Britons, the Alt cult of Dumbarton, were not successful, though. The Viking Age brought great changes in Britain and Ireland, no less in Scotland than elsewhere, with the Vikings conquering and settling the islands in various mainland areas, including Caithness, Sutherland, and Callaway. In the middle of the 9th century, Catil Flatnose is said to have had founded the Kingdom of the Isles, governing many of these territories. By the end of that century, the Vikings had destroyed the Kingdom of Northumbria, greatly weakened the Kingdom of Strathclyde, and founded the Kingdom of York. And you know, you always wonder why do they have New York? What's this New Hampshire, New York? Well, over in England, where a lot of these people come from, right? They actually had this place called York. And so, hey, Kingdom of York. Well, it could have been. It's about as big, or it's pretty damn huge. Not just the city, but New York, all of itself, going way up. Buffalo, all that stuff. Great neck. So, pretty interesting. In a major battle in 893, the Vikings killed the king of Fortray, Aegon mac Inglusa, the king of Dalriada, and Almac Bonta, and others, and the aftermath in the 840s, Kenneth MacAlpine became king of the Picts. And so you can see where they get that, where names come from, but this is almost like Kenneth. Things change over time, and if you were to put it out of that to an old worldish and get it around to it, names become a little bit different. You're going to see that a lot, and you're going to see me murdering these names, by the way. Oh my God, I got out of line. During the reign of Canaan's grandson, Constantine, it's just missing an N. Isn't that strange? Macida, outsiders began to refer to the region as Kingdom of Alba rather than the Kingdom of the Picts, but it is not known whether this is because a new kingdom was established or Alba was simply a closer approximation of the Pictish name for the Picts. Was this actually what they named themselves instead of the nickname people had given them because of the tattoo fetish? However, through the Pictish language did not appear suddenly. A process of Gaelicization, which may have begun generations earlier, was clearly underway during the reigns of Constantine and his successors. By a certain point, probably during the 11th century, all the inhabitants of North Alba had become fully Gaelicized Scots and Pictish and the Pictish identity was forgotten. Later, the idea of Picts as a tribe was revived in myths and in legends. So you can see that it's been changed and twisted over time into this idea that there was this little group right here that was like this, and it was really like there were people living in this area for thousands of years that had come into the area at the end of the last ice age. The top of this was frozen over. But after the end of the great catastrophes and things that had happened, in which very few lived if they were living over there, unless they were down in the Spain areas and so on, something much more south away from it. And they still had, if the floods came that way, that they would have been there for thousands of years living through this and had come from somewhere more up like they're looking at ancient Anatolia, but you got to go a little farther than that. And guess who? We have the Scythians, who we've seen so many things I've shown where they have tattoos all on them, but tattoos go back all kinds of ways, and you can tell groups and things, and it's amazing what we've been able to pull out here just in the last 20 years, but even more so in the last 10, even more so some neat stuff in the last 5 years. I mean, Göbekli Tepe is a game changer, but finding out that the pre-dynastic Egyptians, like Ginger, the Caucasian, blonde-haired, curly-haired mummy that was naturally formed before they even made mummification, it's in the Gibelline area up there, had tattoos on him. And the other one that they found with them has tattoos on it. And that'll make a connection whenever they find all these ancient mummified type bodies that they found from the Tarim Basin and all these places in the Proto-Europeans. And man, they got tattoos, every single one of them, and this Beauty of Mulan and all these people that have a connection that most people aren't aware of. For who, much later, did they become? Kings and kingdoms. And so they have Pictish chronicles and other things. They have periods that they talk about. Kate, or Cat, and you know where that name Kate comes from, situated in Caithness and Sutherland Sea, I think is the way you pronounce it, in modern Buchan. Cursin, perhaps in modern Angus, are Mearns, which I have family connections in there. Fidach, Fib, or modern Fife, is known as the Kingdom of Fife. Fidex, known as possibly near Inverness, great golf there, and we're going to talk about golf a little later. Phoeotia and Atoll. Featoria, which is cognate with Verciones of the Romans, currently shown to be centered on Moray. So here's that map, basically, and they're basically only talking about this edge here and these people at this point and trying to connect all of them with those. And I could go into all the little legends and stuff, but I need to skip over some of this, but it seems like every paragraph or two's got something important in it, and you probably shouldn't skip much. So let's just go with this. Most of the Pictish recorded history, a kingdom of Fortu appears dominant, so much so that the king of Fortu and the king of the Picts may be one and the same thing in the annals. This was previously thought to be a lie in the area of Perth and southern Stratham. However, recent work has convinced those working in the field that Moray, a name referring to a very much larger area in the high Middle Ages than the country of Moray, you know where Moray eels come from, was the core of fortitude. The Picts are often said to have practiced matrilineal kingship succession on the basis of Irish legends and statement in Bede's history. The king of the Picts, when the Bedes was writing, were Bridai and Nectan, sons of Deirlay, who indeed claimed the throne through their mother, Deirlay, or Ilu Ilay, daughter of an earlier Pictish king. And the line of succession, oddly, to these people didn't always go to their son and straight down, for they had brothers and things that were really next in line if they went down, and the brother would take over, and so on. So sometimes it would skip the kid because the brother lived long enough that the kid got old, and it was not even his, but his kid, and things like this happened. Things like that didn't happen in Egypt, and it caused problems whenever somebody lived a long life. They wonder why whenever a king had a long life, there'd a flop after it, after like Ramses and a few of these other guys that I've talked about in videos. But it's because when his sons took succession, they didn't have much life left because he lived so damn long. And people back then, I mean, 50 years old was great. Well, this guy lived to be 80, so they were already 50 whenever they got the throne, and what the hell then? Hey, when it gets to the next part, it's going to be in your top left-hand corner. Click and we'll go to it. And I'll try to catch it correctly and not let it cut off this time. In Ireland, kings were expected to come from among those who had great-grandfather who had been king. Kingly fathers were not frequently succeeded by their sons, not because the Picts practiced matrilineal succession, but because they were usually followed by their own brothers or own cousins, more likely to be experienced men with the authority and support necessary to be a king. This was similar to what's called tanistry. Now, later there's a people called Mormaers, and a lot of people have tried to connect that with the idea of Mormons. And So they're thought to have originated in Pictish times, to have been copied from or inspired by Northumbrian usages. Unclear whether the Mormares were originally former kings, royal officials, or local nobles, or some combination of these that got shut out eventually. Likewise, the Pictish shires and thanages, traces are which are to be found in later times, are thought to have been adopted from their southern neighbors. And there's that shires, and there's people we're about to talk about coming in with some pointy hats on, and they had magic. And you ever watched it whenever he shows up and they're like, oh, Gandalf, Gandalf, and everything, and they hop in the car and what they want him to do it, and you're like, what are they going to do? And he fires off fireworks. That might show a connection to, or that's magic. But in a short amount of time, that'll just be known to everybody as gunpowder. And you can use it to shoot off fireworks and put certain chemicals in it that makes all kinds of neat things that look like magic. But also it can cause the magic of death by using it a different way. The archaeological record provides evidence of the material culture of the Picts. It tells the story of not readily distinguishable from its British, Gaelic, or Anglo-Saxon neighbors. So, very similar, not so different. Although analogy of the knowledge of their so-called Gaelic societies, a term they never used for themselves, may be a useful guide, and these extended across a very large area, relying on knowledge of pre-Roman Gaul, 13th century Ireland as a guide for the Picts in the 6th century to be misleading if analogy is pursued too far. Let that stew for a second. There's a harpist like David on the Dublin Cross. Said that it's dated at 800 AD. Isn't that neat? As with most peoples in the north of Europe in late antiquity, the Picts were farmers, living in small communities. Cattle and horses were an obvious sign of wealth and prestige, kept in large numbers, and place names that transhumance was common. Pastoralism, nomads. You ever wondered why people talk crap about people that don't live in the city, if they live in the city? For most of the farmers are really living out of the city and bringing stuff to the city and helping make it work. Because in the city, you're not really growing anything. Doesn't this seem to be a juxtaposition? Animals were small by later standards. In other words, a lot of genetics got things kicking. Although horses from Britain were ported into Ireland as breed stock to enlarge native horses. And I don't know if you're aware of all kinds of horses they've got, but they've got Welsh ponies, and you can almost just saddle over on those things. You don't have to get up and pull yourself over. You can just do that. And if you don't think about that, then there's Shetlands. And Shetland is in this area we're talking about. These people do crazy things with genetics. It's amazing. They have this knack for it. They've made Clydesdale horses and things like that we know about. The furry feet on them, and all they need is be all white and have a horn like a unicorn, like a narwhal coming out of its forehead, and I'll be damned if that doesn't look more like a unicorn than anything. Magic. From Irish sources, it appears that the elite engaged in competitive cattle breeding for size even. It may have been in the case of Pictland also. Carvings show hunting with dogs, and also, unlike in Ireland, with falcons. These are falconers, the people who work with falcons. That seems real important through just about every damn people that we've been talking about, doesn't it? So that's another one of those things that's got to go back way before, doesn't it? Cereal crops included wheat, barley, oats, and rye, and I'll be damned if those are not the same ones the Sumerians got, and them Egyptians, and the emmer wheats and things like that, and we still use it today. Vegetables include kale, cabbage, onions, leeks, peas, beans, and turnips. Yum. And some types no longer common, such as skirret. What is skirret? Y'all probably know. Oh, so it's a little plant thing known as skirret, perennial plant. Alphaceae, sometimes known as root vegetable. White root vegetable. I don't know, but apparently it has a rooting on it that's thick and has a flavor to it, like a radish does, and carrots are really a root thing, you know. And if I'm wrong, leave me a comment down, but we're going on. Skirret, huh? Plants such as wild garlic, nettles, watercress may have been gathered in the wild. Pastoral economy meant that the hides and leather were readily available. Wool was the main source of fibers for clothing, and flax was also common, although hemp was also used right in this range here, because we're not talking about the eldest of times. This goes way back, though, they're talking about, although it's not clear if they grew it from fibers for oil or as a foodstuff. Flax. In the earliest days, it's not clear whether they used flax for like washing hairs and oils and things like that, or if they used it for their fiber or foodstuffs, or D, all of the above. And I'm going to get through this paragraph and it's going to change. Fish, shellfish, seals, and whales were exploited along the coast and rivers. The importance of domesticated animals suggests that meat and milk products were a major part of the diet of ordinary people, while the elite would have eaten a rich diet in meat from farming and from hunting. And so, isn't that neat? And we're going to end this with a picture of a cranog. And this is basically a yurt on stilts that these people used to live on to protect themselves out on the water. But also it was cooler and things that would do it. But also over time, and you discarding your food cross off of here, you would attract a lot of the fish, helping to feed the fish in some way. And you could cast your bread and things like that. But then you'd hook up a hook onto it from off your porch. Wham! You can catch fish. That's only one point of view of this. We're going to part number 2 now. It'll be in your top left-hand corner. And we'll see you there. Hey, like, share, and subscribe before you go. Peace.